Might be able to toss her salad, but you ain't putting a baby in her belly. Let's talk about why forest elves can give you the Jesus juice syringe right into your muscle, but as a human, you ain't gotta worry about a half-elf. And this lore can also be found in the Maiden Manual. So the thing that we need to acknowledge is that forest elves can only mate with forest elves. Which is kind of interesting because in my manga, The Devil's Deal, we saw Cannabissa, that forest elf at the beginning of the video, hitting potentially on Selma's husband. If Cannabissa was trying to potentially steal Selma's man, why, if they couldn't have kids? Has she discovered a workaround to this? Well, the answer is simply going to be no. It doesn't matter if they put sperm directly right into her uterus, it will not take. And that is because back in the prior era, before the gods even arrived on this world, the Fae had a problem. They went into war with half-elves, and the half-elf armies eventually pushed the Fae to the point of extinction, but unfortunately, or fortunately, they ended up losing that war. And to ensure that that never happened again, the Great Faes made it where elves could literally not get impregnated by anything other than a forest elf. Well, technically elf, that would all become forest elves because the Great Faes would use their magic to transform all future generations of elves into forest elves. And I know what you must be saying, but Dark, there are more types of elves. So what's the deal? Well, let's address them. The first on the list is going to be the ice/snow elf. But the thing about these guys is even though they are elves, they have literally no initial relation with elves of prior era. Because the Ice Elf origin story has everything to do with a war that was happening in the Frostsafe Forest, and they were a collection of beings such as humans, elves, orcs, that then pleaded with Ezeron, the spirit of snow, and Glace, the goddess of winter seasons, to save them from Tarma and the other nations that were basically cornering them and would drive their people to extinction. Because it was effectively a society rather than a race that would later become the Ice Elves once Ezeron granted their wish for security and then later converted all those species into what we now know as Ice Elves. And Cave Elves were actually created in the Sixth Era because they were originally forest elves that underwent a process that ended up changing their entire biology due to their ongoing conflict with the Kranos. In a similar fashion to how the dwarves have an offshoot of their own species called the Molten Dwarves that were brought into existence by Igni, the spirit of fire and metal. So while the forest elves in my mangas, like the Night of Slaughter, can reproduce, there are a lot of things in the way of them actually being able to have children, just within their own race. But it is virtually impossible for a forest elf to create a half-breed. But keep in mind, I said almost, because whenever Fae, dragons, or gods